Thank you. I'm Jean Fasching. I'm honored to be with you today. We're going to talk about marketing through intermediaries, simulated conversations, and how they put you in the room. You might ask yourself, what does it mean to market through intermediaries? What is an intermediary? Well, you can do direct consumer marketing, and that often depends on marketing your product, your package, your promotion, the 4 Ps, broadcast advertising, and your messaging directly to those end consumers. These are generally, for example, small products, small dollar sizes, and in the CPG realm. Well, when you market through intermediaries, it not only depends on those 4 Ps, but it also relies on communication through people, something like agents or sales reps. Generally, these are services and or more complex services like insurance or healthcare or prescription drugs or large consumer offerings like cars. That you would have a sales rep involved in, or perhaps B2B products like generators. There's also category management in retail when talking between manufacturers and grocers and distributors, but that's what's meant by marketing through intermediaries. I'd like you to imagine for a moment, imagine your client who does market through intermediaries comes to you with a business goal. Let's say it's a pharma client and it has a drug with a low margin and a high volume. It's something very generic, a commodity, perhaps a phosphorus type of drug. And they want to raise the price, mainly because it's not in line with what they could get out of the market, and demand is pretty high. They have some messaging and some documents to test about price, and they want to talk to drug reps and perhaps retail pharmacists. So that's a quandary. What would you do? Another one perhaps could be a long-term care insurance company, and they need to raise their rates just because of cost of service at this point in time. And they have gone through what they need to go through to raise those rates through like the public agencies, but now they have to communicate to agents and they have to communicate to end customers and who are existing or new. What would you recommend? Oftentimes what's recommended is, I want to talk to intermediaries and I want to talk to the end customer, so I'm going to do some focus groups and some IDIs, and these groups will be split and they'll look at this material independent and not talk amongst themselves. Well, that's a very traditional approach and an isolated point of view. What we recommend often, and what has worked well for us, is really getting these intermediaries and these end customers in the same room. Now, this may not feel as comfortable to you because it's new compared to what you might recommend, but we found it extremely beneficial to get real-to-life examples of what these two people would say to each other when presented with those messages and with those document changes. And what it does create is a more dynamic conversation about the messages and materials that not only meet the business objectives, but really offer insights and outputs that you really wouldn't have occurred in traditional approaches like focus groups and IDIs. Well, what is a simulated conversation, you might ask? And basically, it's an orchestrated and facilitated conversation. It is carefully planned and thought out. You have to think about the roles, you have to think about the responsibilities, you have to think about the work environment of the intermediaries and customers and where these two would meet up. It's a different type of screener than you probably would do for groups slightly. It's a different type of guide. You'd be in a venue that was very comfortable and representative to what that situation would be, and you'd have materials to present, both original and perhaps some drafts you want to test. It is facilitated by an expert supplier and moderator who've done these before. The supplier needs to screen those participants to ensure that it will work in this format. They have to be articulate, they have to be engaged, they have to be creative and very practical and professional. The moderator facilities too must have experience in the techniques and see if they can do them. I would say that most moderators would probably say they can do this, but if you'd ask them if they have done it lately to get some case stories and stuff, they haven't. So this type of facilitation is less comfortable than focus groups and one-on-one for them. In my opinion, it's a lost art, and it takes great patience to have that conversation and let it involve in some advanced training such as REVIT training or negotiation skills training, strong political science background or psychology background. Well, what is a simulated conversation? It is a three-way conversation between, there's three people in the room, but you're facilitating a two-way conversation with an expert moderator. It involves those intermediaries. It can be many types. It really depends on where in that value chain you want to focus. It could be a sales or drug rep with a physician. It could be a physician with a potential patient. But you really have to think about what is that communication and who needs to be in that room. And you try to get a room where essentially your clients can view what's happening or some kind of cable TV hookup so the clients can see what's going on. It's very interesting and engaging to actually watch these conversations. And you want to make sure that room really feels like a real-life situation as much as possible, and that the moderator is engaged and involved, but not necessarily in the middle of the conversation. Their job is really to make the materials and the guide flow and everything to be seen at the right time and to manage the conversation if needed, but let it happen is more important. Sometimes these simulated conversations take as long as a group. They're 2 hours, and you really plan the entrances and your exits so these folks can talk about the materials or maybe pre-read the materials outside in the room before they come in, so they would have some kind of a foundation of what they're talking about today, perhaps to their an agent, to their end user. So that gives you an idea of what is a simulated conversations, but you really want to have those independent reactions to those materials with few other people in the room. Okay. Well, what is the goal of simulated conversation? One, and what's important is none of these people should know each other. We're often asked by Salesforce if they can bring a customer in the room that they already know, and we don't want to have that conversation biased by pre-existing relationships. So it's really important that these people have real roles of an agent and a real need as an end customer and user, but they don't know each other. And the goal is to really represent what's happening in real life. For what situations? Again, when the business goals of the objectives of our client rely on intermediaries such as insurance, financial services, pharmaceutical, distribution, retail channel type of questions, category management, you really should think about simulated conversations as an option. And for what situations, they're often used to check to ensure these intermediaries understand, deliver, and reinforce your intended message to the end customer. Is it happening? Perhaps there's issues out there with some current materials. What you're hearing from the end, your sales force, is that consistent? Is that this happening out there? And is the message that you want being delivered? You need to listen and realize and understand what's happening in a simulated conversation. Well, why they work? Now, this is a funny picture here, but you become a fly on the wall to really privileged conversations that you wouldn't necessarily see. Another reason why they work is when you think about the internal politics of an organization, you hear a lot of buzz around what should happen from the sales force, from marketing, from advertising, from product management, and why things should work. And if you do these types of studies independent of a simulated conversation when a message needs to be delivered through intermediaries, you really have a lot of word of mouth going on as far as what needs to be changed perhaps from all these constituencies. And this gives you the opportunity to listen and hear it happen in person. So it's something that you generally don't get to see, and it helps avoid word-of-mouth decisions. You get to hear from articulate, engaged participants. What's most important is that you have a structured way for your staff to hear those actual conversations with some experts in the room and some science behind it. And you can learn from the best-in-class intermediaries as well as from the normal. What would you experience depending on the range of talent that would have such a conversation and be able to deliver materials. You can reach a consensus on these actions and really use it as a final check before going out for product launch. Some of the questions here that can be answered and that are important in today's marketplace is, on the far right, is the customer getting the information they need in the words they understand? There's a lot of work nowadays, especially in the insurance and the banking industries, around transparency of documentation and making it easier for customers and consumers to understand, and this is a great way to find out if indeed that is true when you're marketing through intermediaries. You can find out how the best-in-class advisors convey the information and use it in many ways. You can figure out if the agents really feel if they have everything they need to deliver the message, or are there gaps. And if your messaging and documents has made the conversation easier for both the agent and the end customer. And then how they reacted, and then get them to the information and get them to reflect as to why and lead them through that conversation. What you can expect, in my experience in doing these, is that you have very lively discussions. It's different. It's different than what clients are used to seeing, and that's important. You can have these best-in-class talking points, and they can apply to multiple constituencies, from the intermediary's point of view and also from the customer's point of view. But in addition, you could use these to make points to your executive management and to your advertising, to your PR, to your sales force. So different internal constituencies. It gives you information and real meaningful talking points that you can really get these insights infused in the organization. You could have visual reactions to materials, especially price changes and fees. This is going to be perhaps what does happen, and you need an expert moderator in that room to facilitate this, but you need to understand what the objectives would be and why, and how to get your sales force, let's say, to work through them. You get immediate insights into hidden conversation for marketers, ads, and PR folks. We've had situations where in that room they can take those changes and quickly make them and be ready for market faster, because they've seen it and they believe it even more than they would have if it was independent and hearing from two separate groups. You get lifelike training tools. Oftentimes we have gotten the approval of the end user and the best-in-class type of agent to really share their videotapes in a training situation or for an internal company presentation, and it has tremendously helped the organization understand what's happening and what needs to be said. And I see clients literally on the edge of their seat, not eating all the candies in the back room, because they're truly listening to what happens here. So it's something that is unique and they haven't seen before. Now, to get to the next page, I want to bring you through a case story. And this case story is about how to accelerate a conversation. Now, in this case story, you have to understand that essentially these were about supportive materials. This was for a financial services product. It was really a long-term financial services product, and not just one, many of them, like laddered bonds, CDs, annuities, fixed and variable, universal or whole life, long-term care policies. All these policies, after the agent was sitting with the customer, understood their needs, convinced them, let's say, that this is what you need considering your situation, have supportive material behind them. And the supportive material essentially has to be used legally to make sure that the customer understands exactly what they're buying. So they need to walk them through a whole process again and get the critical information that they need in order to execute these financial service instruments and insurance instruments. Well, what they know about the forms that are needed to support them, often they're quadruple carbon, they're expensive to produce, they're cumbersome to use, and they're required by law, so they have to be there. They're not as flashy and wonderful as point of sales material and critical to the agents, but they're important, and oftentimes they can stall sales. That document, if not done well, may make that customer rethink why they want this policy, because it's just not as polished and nice and understanding as that presentation that agent gave them. Well, the challenge here was to streamline and prioritize these required documents. Some of them you might have heard of, like statements of use, transfers of funds, income riders, and such. But that's the situation and the challenge. What we proposed was an approach of a simulated conversation. And it was between the agent and the customer and the professional moderator. Now, there are some things you should know here. Let me get back to that previous page. Is that the financial professional was not linked to this customer in any way, shape, or form. They never knew each other before they came in the room. The customer was screened to have a need for this class of financial services and an interest in it, plus to be articulate, professional, conversational. They had to have that need so they could have as real of a conversation as possible. The client wanted to hear from best-in-class and average agents because they wanted to know essentially how people use these documents. Oftentimes they're not being used as properly as they should be because the customer needs to actually view them instead of being talked through them. So they wanted to see how different agents did this. We had an intimate room in a focus group facility that really helped us simulate the sales process with a couple tables or a conference table in some situations with the moderator sitting more at the end. We replicated the sales flow. There was many times when the agent and the end customer were not in the room together. We would orchestrate who read the materials first, who came in first, talking about it, bringing in that customer to have the conversation over the materials. Oftentimes having different graphs and making it more graphical so the client could react to which one spoke to them better. And it worked excellent. Essentially, some of the results, we were able to prioritize the revisions of what document to come first for what products. It gave us insights on combining the point of sales material with support materials and improving both that we never thought of. We improved the point of sales as well as the support materials. We eliminated all those carbon forms. We combined certain materials too, so not only could we make better support materials, we could eliminate a support material by combining it with a point of sale material. And we gained approval from the best-in-class financial professionals to use their conversation as training and launching materials. So just to give you an idea of a few quotes that we got out of this, a lot of times I like to hear some audio from this, but these quotes are very powerful. The customer essentially was saying that which ones they liked better, that the graphics were easier to understand than the words that were there, and they really didn't mind signing perhaps 3 or 4 forms versus a carbon form. It wasn't that much of a bother for them. Oftentimes we got some pushback from the agents. Before the customer got in the room and saw these materials, they would say, I don't even use these. I turn them over and just talk them through it and turn them back and have it signed, and that's something that we don't want to happen. So when they could see that they could use these materials more effectively and that the customer actually liked them, it really changed their point of view, and they would refer, this person just told me that is better than what I'm usually doing, and my assistant can print these in the office, and I don't need to order or stock these forms anymore. We just send them in to all the relevant parties. So that's the case study I wanted to share with you today. Now, to wrap up, I just wanted to give you some keys to simulated conversations and the success of them. First of all, recognize the need for a dynamic point of view. Many of the times we're so stuck in the traditional things we do and the comfort of separating two groups to get their reactions to the materials and doing what we know. We don't offer this as an option to our clients, and it is something, at least as part of a design or perhaps a whole design for a proposal and a study, that's very, very relevant and different. And we should recognize it and consider offering it as an internal researcher or as a supplier. Use that experienced moderator or get your moderators to get some experience. Not only should they have experience with doing this type of technique and facilitation, either in another field, perhaps negotiation or something with political science, but also in their day-to-day activities as a moderator. And they should be highly trained moderators, the REVA training, going to the conferences, people who are truly dedicated to their craft. Take some time to absorb those materials and give your participant time to absorb materials before they go into the room if needed, because oftentimes clients, these existing relationships need to occur, and your agents or whomever might say, before I get them in the room, I've already had this conversation, so let's pretend that this has happened and we both know these materials already. Manage the participants' entrance and exits. Make them as real life as possible. Use real intermediaries and customers and not pre-existing relationships, and wait for it. Really be that fly in the wall. You need to be patient and figure out what evolves and what they're saying, and that patience is key. Thank you.